And now that we've learned a bit about you today, I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. Thank you again to this panel for joining us to close out the summit and to share more and help us learn from your work. First, I'd like to introduce Anyeley Hallova, who is the founder of Adre, a real estate development company in Portland, Oregon, and a rare developer focused on both sustainability and equity. She has led projects including mixed-use developments, affordable housing, and offices for mission-driven nonprofits. She founded her development firm with the purpose of developing buildings that create social and economic benefits for the Black community and other underrepresented groups that traditionally lack access to real estate investment opportunities. She is also currently the chair of the U.S. Green Building Council. Next, I'd like to introduce Jose Bodipo-Memba, who is the Chief Diversity Officer at the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUD. He has over 20 years of environmental and sustainability experience throughout California. SMUD is a community-owned utility with one of the most ambitious net zero targets in the country, and which also exceeds California's state requirements. At SMUD, his work includes overseeing the Sustainable Communities Program, and the focus of his work overall is to advocate for diversity, inspire an inclusive culture based on trust and respect, and to create belonging among employees, customers, and communities, all of which should ultimately result in positive, equitable outcomes for all. Our final panelist is Athena Motavvef. She's a legislative representative on the policy and legislative team at Earthjustice. She is a federal advocate working to electrify our transportation system, to reduce air pollution, and to protect our climate. SGA has had the honor of working with Athena in the coalition Helping America Rebuild and Go Electric, that's CHARGE, which aligns zero emissions transportation advocacy with smart growth and equity goals. Athena has a leading role in CHARGE, co-leading a working group and providing essential expertise on the coalition strategy. And with that, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists today. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Great, and here you all are. It's great to see your faces. So let's get started by hearing a bit about your background and how you got into the work that you do. And really, what is your why? Why are you focused on equitable decarbonization? Could we start with Anyeley?
Hi, well, thanks for having me, Catherine. That's a big question. I think I could talk about it for an hour, couple minutes. So I started off, I think this journey probably out of high school or maybe even younger, thinking about environmental issues. Lived in Nigeria for a while when I was a kid, saw a lot of kind of insecurity around life insecurity that kind of met environmental issues, and started off actually wanting to like feed the world through like hydroponics, and sort of made my journey all through that path all the way to real estate development. So it doesn't necessarily sound like the logical conclusion to someone who's very interested in the environment, but I think we know, I guess now, or people are talking about it now, that buildings contribute to 40% of carbon emissions, the operation and construction of buildings. And so a lot of people talk about the important things, transportation and other sectors, but really buildings play a big role in that. And at the same time, communities of color and lower income communities are the most affected by climate change, yet don't get those same type of environmental investments in the buildings that they inhabit and live and are around. I think in the United States specifically, we have a context of our country being segregated by design with land use practices, lending practices, all of the practices against Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and really those communities not being in the fields of real estate development, design, and a lot of the policy making that affect these kind of changes that impact their communities. So kind of the intersection of a climate emergency and kind of racial, I would say, justice issues is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think it was a long journey that involved a specific look at environmental issues where I got started. So yeah, I'll talk more about it as we go on.
Well, we're excited to talk more about it with you, and thank you for sharing a bit about your journey. This morning, you're talking about hydroponics. We also heard from our keynote, who is a scientist turned planner, and much of what you've mentioned now as well, looking at the intersections between the climate crisis And the structural racism in housing policy and lending policy was a major focus for us on day one. So thank you again for coming today.
Thank you.
Jose, can you share a bit about what brought you to the role that you're in and your work in equitable decarbonization?
Sure, Catherine, thank you so much. I'm just honored to be amongst such a strong panel. I'm going to go all the way back. Before I even got into this field, I actually started off as a high school teacher in Oakland, California, and immediately recognized the level of inequity from an environmental and planning and land use perspective that the students I was teaching were facing compared to the experience I had growing up. And it was something that just kept on sitting in my head as I was teaching classes with students who are primarily of color that didn't have access to a safe environment, to a healthy environment, that we're seeing life expectancy at rates significantly lower than what should be accepted in a country like the United States. That was kind of the trigger that inspired me actually to enter into the environmental planning field. Subsequent to my teaching stint there in the Bay Area, I actually started in San Diego. And so I did California Environmental Quality Act, environmental planning work there. And that was really my first formal entree in the environmental space. And my focus really was on school planning. And I really wanted to make sure that we could do something in terms of how we plan, design, located facilities for students of color in the greater San Diego area. That was kind of my inspiration, is seeing the fact that students have no choice for their outcomes in their way of life, and then realizing in that space more and more about the impact of climate change on those communities that I was working in and studying, really kind of inspired me to move forward to the work that we're doing here at SMUD. And so really this is about improving the quality of life of our entire community, but particularly communities of color that are most disproportionately impacted, as was mentioned before. So as a public utility, I think we have a different drive than maybe some of the IOUs. We are subject to our customers, to all of our customers. And we want to make sure that we're not just the provider of electricity, but that we're an economic driver, that we improve the education, we improve opportunities, and that all of the intersectionality of those issues all tie to the climate change impact in our underserved communities. So really that would be the conglomeration of the why I'm in this space at SMUD, why DEIB is important, and why it needs to be reflected in terms of how we move forward in our zero carbon strategy. So happy to share later on some of the things that we're doing, but also happy to learn about ways we can do it better.
Thank you so much. Athena, it'd be great to hear from you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Athena Motavvef. So I actually grew up in Los Angeles, which is heavily polluted by cars, buses, trucks. I also took the school bus to school, and I was the first stop in the morning. I was the last stop at night, or after school, which turned into nighttime. And I also had asthma growing up, which caused me to miss a lot of school days. There were some times where I missed weeks because I was hospitalized. And that led me to be behind in school. And it also, made my parents have to miss work because they were taking care of me. And unfortunately, my experience is not unique. It's a pretty common experience across the US. Transportation is the leading sector for greenhouse gas emissions and a source of air pollution in a lot of communities. And so I work to really make sure that we are advancing federal policies that make sure that we are cleaning up the air in our communities and also combating the climate crisis. I focus more on medium and heavy duty vehicles because those make up less than 10% of vehicles on the road, but they contribute to 45% of transportation's NOx pollution and over half of the fine particulate matter pollution and greenhouse gases. And so it just leads to devastating human impacts like asthma, as I mentioned. And so that's what really got me interested in environmental issues. And it wasn't until I got into college where I was able to do my own research after taking environmental science classes in school, where I realized the disproportionate impacts of what was happening to communities of color. So, I felt like what I was learning didn't give the whole picture. And so that's what I became really interested in. I ended up working for We Act for Environmental Justice, which is based in New York City. One of their first campaigns actually was to get a bus depot to transition away from diesel in the 80s. So I just wanted to continue on that legacy of working on those issues, as it felt really important to me.
Well, thank you again to Athena and to all of you for sharing what inspired you to move in this direction and what motivates you. I think it's it all comes back to personal stories and to helping people, especially knowing how many people are already disproportionately impacted and will continue to be if we're not able to reduce emissions. So with that, I'd really be excited to start hearing more from you about your priorities and your tactical focuses in your work in decarbonization and how you've been able to focus on equitable decarbonization. So be great to hear, first from you, Jose, given the, ambitious net zero commitments that SMUD has made, what you would like to share about your strategy and, if you'd like to go into it, how you're using data and partnerships to inform the direction that you're taking.
Thank you, Catherine. Would definitely like to go into that. So here at SMUD, we have made a pledge, what we call our 2030 zero carbon pledge. And so we want to make sure that we as an organization can lead our community to do that in an equitable way. And really my charge as a part of that process is ensuring the equitable outcomes as a part of that. As we are looking at how we achieve those goals, as mentioned in the poll earlier on, we're really trying to figure out how we can focus on coming up with clean energy solutions, but those clean energy solutions that apply for all communities and all of our customers. One of the things we found from a technology standpoint as well, the carbon zero technology is beginning to become more accessible. It's still only becoming accessible to certain population. And so we're trying to identify ways in which we can do that in an affordable manner, and that as we launch pilots, we can do so in an equitable manner as well, so that we can make sure that all of our customers can be moved along towards that target goal in an equitable way. And as Catherine mentioned before, data has really been a key driver for us. And the first steps we've really started to take a look at when we started developing that strategy was identifying within our service area, which includes all Sacramento County, where from an air quality standpoint was the worst concentration of impacts occurring. We identified where those areas were, but we also developed what we call our Sustainable Communities Resource Priorities Map, which actually overlays that air quality impact with a number of other factors, including income information, school ranking information, transportation access. I heard in the notes identification about communities that are actually have offerings of transit-oriented development. We also include information related to environmental justice. We wanted to make sure we had multiple layers. We even included overlay that identified where existing infrastructure for EVs, for bike share, ride share existed. We want to make sure we had all that data in one location, so that when we started identifying what solutions were on the table, one, we knew where to prioritize to ensure equitable outcomes occurred. Two, we also knew where community organizations were, so we didn't necessarily plan for the communities, but we planned with those communities. So on top of that, leveraging that data, we also identified CBOs in those neighborhoods that could be our ears, our eyes, and also our audience to determine whether or not what we saw was equivalent with what they saw in their neighborhoods. And in many cases, those community groups have been the on the ground leaders in making sure that we're coming up with solutions that are aligned. They've also been the individuals that told us we're messing up, which has been important for us, because again, nothing's going to be perfect. But really ensuring that we are deploying our technological solutions as it relates to energy storage in an equitable way has been a key driver. So for example, we have two pilots that we've really been proud of. One is in our North Sacramento area in a neighborhood called Gardenlands, predominantly the Latinx population. We actually are launching electrification improvements within that neighborhood at the residential and commercial level. But what we've been doing as a part of that process is really working with community at the ground level to understand what are the impacts on the culture, what are the impacts on the food, what are the impacts on the day of life living for that community, as opposed to just making it a mandate. We're also evaluating how our older housing stock is impacted by some of these technological changes. And then on the other end, from an energy storage perspective, we're looking in South Sacramento, which is predominantly a blended community, which is high concentrations of African American, Latinx, and AAPI populations as well, and identifying community centers where we can actually look at long-range energy storage opportunities that we can actually leverage when we have periods of high heat, or during the cold periods, rainy periods, and stormy periods of our wintertime, to make sure we have that redundancy and resiliency in areas that we need it. So those are just a couple of things that we're doing as a part of the process to ensure equity across the way. And again, we are continuing to leverage those community relationships. And I think what's important is we're not just writing a check as sponsors, we're actually engaging in multi-year partnership with these CBOs so that there's an actual mutual benefit for the communities that they serve and for some of these 2030 zero carbon targets. The last piece I'd want to share is we're really focused on the jobs and workforce and inclusive economic development outcomes as a part of this process as well, because we want to make sure that as those technologies are developed, that the individuals in the communities that are most disadvantaged at this point are able to actually benefit from the economic prosperity opportunities tied to the technological changes we're making tied to climate change improvement. And so we're really actually focusing on workforce training and development, and we're requiring that a number of our contractors to actually build their manufacturing facilities in those communities, and the largest being the California Mobility Center, which is in Power In area, which is predominantly a Latinx focused community. So those are just some of the things that we're trying to ensure equitable outcomes and still aligning with our climate change goals as an organization.
Well, thank you so much, Jose, for sharing that intersectional and data-driven approach that you're taking. And we've dropped a number of the resources in the chat. And I'm also struck again, by your focus on those long-term partnerships with community-based organizations. That was also a key theme in our keynote today. A city government leader finding trusted messengers and partnering in a mutually beneficial way in their climate justice work. So Anyeley, I'd be really excited to hear from you next a bit about some of the methods and approaches that you're taking in decarbonization. I know in real estate, people often feel it isn't possible until they've seen the kinds of projects that can be built. So I'd welcome the chance to learn from your work. And I'm going to also incorporate a bit of a question that we have coming in from the audience on what you see the role of market rate housing to be. And let's first hear about your work, and then I might follow up with the audience question while we're talking real estate.
Thank you. Yeah, so my work, I would categorize in two ways. One is my development company, Adre, which I started in 2020 as a result of a lot of things that I had experienced, I guess, through my career, and wanting to really actually just do the work of everything we're talking about here, which is when I learned about sustainability, actually as an undergrad, studying in Costa Rica, study abroad program in Costa Rica, I learned that it was, kind of the three legs of sustainability: social, environmental, and economic. And so after that, I sort of searched for that. And I would say that didn't exist. I think everybody's, focused on the environmental part and not the social part. And so finally, I feel like in 2020, I was able to, what I would call, meld my personal interest and my volunteer work with what I actually do day to day. And so I started a company, Adre, with a specific focus on a couple ideas: design excellence, environmental stewardship, equitable outcomes, and development innovation. And I just recently added a new value to my company, which is actually educational advancement, because I realized a lot of the interest I have need to incorporate, or I have been incorporating the idea of youth getting involved and getting into these fields. So my company is really about trying to create ownership within communities of color, but not just ownership of anything, actually of sustainable buildings, buildings with good design. And so all of the projects I'm working on are pursuing that in different ways. And whether it's a nonprofit, a Black-led, Black-serving nonprofit who's going to own this building now, but it's going to be what I would call super sustainable in both an equity and an environmental sustainability way, or thinking about home ownership for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So really thinking about not just who inhabits the building and experiencing and living and working in that building, but also the economic development drivers for that with regards to ownership, because really that is what has been stripped from communities of color. It's like the ability to have self-governance, and power and control of land, control of buildings. I think some of the awesome things that have been going on in the state of Oregon right now in my development world is the Energy Trust of Oregon, which helps to fund a lot of energy efficiency measures in buildings, gave us a net zero fellowship, which has allowed us to work on a project that really is, it's called the Williams and Russell Project, and it's a piece of land that a hospital and redevelopment authority in Portland essentially took from the Black community and the hospital in the 70s, and the hospital decided to give back the land to the Black community. And so there's a nonprofit that is going to be the steward of that land, and really what are Black community priorities around that property. So we're going to be doing affordable housing, affordable homes for sale, and then a Black business center. The layer I think that I'm bringing to it is, with the help of the Energy Trust of Oregon, they gave us this fellowship, and we're going to be pursuing a net zero energy, net zero waste, and net zero water research project, and thinking about a microgrid on this site, and how these buildings can kind of interact with each other and also have as much sustainability. And so that's really key. I think different organizations helping to fund these efforts specifically for communities of color. Another great thing that happened in Portland is voters approved a new source of funding called the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And it's funding specifically for green infrastructure, a lot of it dealing with buildings, but thinking about who are the people that are actually doing the work to implement this green infrastructure. And so that money is going to nonprofits in our city, specifically on this topic. So 2 of my projects got funding for that. One of them $4.7 million, and the other one $3.5 million. So that's a huge source of funding that didn't exist, in thinking about how we can bring environmental sustainability to our community, which benefits all, but specifically to communities of color who have not received this level of investment before. And so I think all the rest of my projects are going for ideas of biophilia, energy production, indoor air quality, this kind of net zero, and really thinking about lower carbon materials such as mass timber construction. And so I talked about one of our values is development innovation. I'm a leader in the mass timber movement in the United States. I would say in Oregon, but I think the leadership comes from Oregon, so in the United States. And really thinking about the embodied energy of buildings and the materiality of it, not just in kind of the mechanical or electrical plumbing side of it. So that's my development side. And then my volunteer side is more focused on policy. And so I'm the chair of the U.S. Green Building Council, really thinking about, they've been the leader, and I would say are still the leader in the environmental sustainability movement. And the question is, how do you bring in equity into that to ensure that those environmental benefits are distributed equitable in different building types for different people. So that's a big focus that we have in 2023 and onward. And then my last role is really on the land use policy side. So I'm the chair of Oregon's Land Conservation and Development Commission. And we just had a huge, I don't even know how to, monumental rulemaking in Oregon around equitable and climate friendly communities. And really it's an overarching policy that is essentially created at the state, but enacted by the cities and the counties. And it's about reducing climate pollution in many different ways, but all associated with land use efforts, be it climate friendly areas that cities are going to start to define. So high quality pedestrian, bike, and transit areas of cities, planning for electrical vehicle, the electrical vehicle future. And then I think a big one is reforming costly parking mandates and really allowing parking to be driven by demand, but also about cost and reducing cost, because a lot of the lower income communities, people don't actually can't afford to have cars. And so we want to make sure that especially affordable housing is placed in areas that people have access to affordable, reliable transportation. And so I think that that's more on the land use side. So I'm sort of touching high level policy on buildings, land use, and then also the individual development. And for me, sustainability, as I mentioned, has always been about equity. And I'm finally glad in 2023 that people are starting to see it that way. Thank you. And I think the question you were saying, how does market rate housing fit into this? It should fit into it 100%. That's what it should fit in. I think it's just really hard for developers who manage risk. You know, you just want to do the minimum, right? Because there's so much risk involved in development. And really it's about developers seeing that the minimum is not working for our climate future or for our actual communities and for thinking about equitable outcomes. And how can you do more in this project than you did the last project is sort of, I would say, at least developers should start there. And, you know, really at the end of the day, the environmental sustainability and social sustainability reduces risk for the developer and the community. And I think when developers start to see that, I'm hoping that they'll embrace it more.
Well, thank you for making those connections between environmental and social sustainability and between, walkability, transit access, reduced or eliminated parking mandates, and a climate prepared future. And, it's really, inspirational and exciting to hear about the work that you're doing. And again, that intersectional approach between land use and building design. Athena, it'd be great to hear more about your priorities in decarbonization and your methods. Whether you'd like to share from your work or also your work with the Charge Coalition, would welcome the opportunity to hear about it.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I focus mostly on electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicles. Heavy vehicle traffic and trucking corridors are disproportionately placed in or near low income communities and communities of color. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we are a nonprofit law organization. We represent our clients free of charge. A lot of our clients are environmental justice communities who are suffering from these impacts and have asked us to work with them on these issues. So we always work where there's a case for environmental justice. I'll give a specific example of what I work on in the medium and heavy duty space. So I talked about how I took the school bus to school and I had asthma. And so one of my favorite things that I've worked on so far is electrifying school buses. We have worked with we worked with a coalition, both part of Charge and another one, which has some folks from Charge in it as well, where it's basically, there's like some national groups, there's some environmental justice groups, there's some local groups, state groups, regional groups, that all want to electrify school buses across the US. There have been studies that shown that students that ride electric school buses do better in school. The buses are quieter, so they're able to pay attention. The drivers are able to actually hear what's happening in the back of the truck because there's not this noise going on. So there's just a lot of benefits for students, and obviously we want them to have good air quality that they're breathing on their way to school. So that's one of the reasons why we work on that. And so we worked with our coalition to, we brought people to DC to talk to their legislators and, tell their stories about why it's important for them to have funding to electrify school buses in their district. We've done letter writing campaigns as another example, where they have written to their school district or they have written to their legislator of like why this is a really important thing to them. And so thankfully, last year, well, there's two different areas. There's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We were able to get the Clean School Bus Program, which got $5 billion for clean school buses. 2.5 of that would go to electric. The other 2.5 could go to electric, but it could also go to propane and natural gas in other areas. And we also were able to get the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act where there was a program for $1 billion for class 6 and 7 heavy duty vehicles. And you might be surprised to know that the vast majority of buses in the US are actually electric, not electric school buses, but they're school buses. So electrifying school buses really makes a huge impact on our transportation system. So in addition to that, you know, we did a lot of partnership with different orgs across the US to let folks know that this money was available. My expertise is on the federal level, so I reached out to different legislators and I let their district staff know that this money was available and to, you know, please tell school districts about this money. The important thing about that is it's really important to have a trusted messenger. A lot of school districts were surprised to know that there was this money available for them. Like they didn't believe it was a real thing until their legislator reached out to them and let them know about this opportunity. So that was one way that we really helped out. The other thing is in terms of like what we've done with data, in the Clean School Bus Program, there is a mandate from Congress to prioritize high need students. But the question is, how does EPA define what high need is? And that's a question that they had to ask themselves. So there's different definitions. I think some people might think it's a school districts in a non-attainment area where there's a lot of pollution. Some people might define it as an area where there's free or reduced lunch for a lot of students. And so what we've been doing is kind of looking at the data and seeing, okay, what kind of makes sense in terms of what high need is and where this money is going. So we've just been looking at where grants have gone and kind of doing an analysis of like what that all means so that we can share feedback with the EPA of like, okay, well, this is what's happening in the first round. Is there anything we can do to improve it in the second round? Or is the way that it's been defined has been good? So I've been really proud of that work. And that's just one example of the work we've done to get investments in electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicles.
Okay, thank you. And I'd encourage the audience to, you know, put your questions in the Q&A so we can hear from you and, you know, help you learn from these amazing panelists. So after this conference, we're going to be developing calls to action, you know, to be sent to all the summit attendees. And we're working in collaboration with, you know, a few dozen people who've signed up for the breakout groups. I think listening to all of you today, you both shared, you know, a lot of incredible decarbonization work and also how you're leaning into the, you know, your different roles and the levers that you have for influence. So Athena speaking about your role working in the federal space, and then, you know, hearing about your perspectives, Jose and Anyeley as developers and working at a community-owned utility. So it would be amazing to hear, you know, in maybe 1 to 2 sentences, if you have any ideas for a call to action for the audience, maybe for people who are not already, you know, working in decarbonization or steeped in the sustainability space, you know, what is something that they can do to advance equitable decarbonization in their work or in their personal lives? And feel free to jump in, whoever feels inspired first.
I just realized I didn't go off mute, so I'm happy to start. I'll give a specific example of a successful campaign that we've done with Earthjustice supporters specifically. We learned last year that the Postal Service was only planning to electrify 10% of their trucks. And that really caught our eye because mail trucks are actually perfect for electrification. They park at one area at night, so it's perfect for charging. They go short distances, they average around 20 miles, and they idle in our streets and they go through all of our neighborhoods. So what we did is we did a letter writing campaign, and we had over 160,000 Earthjustice supporters send letters to the Board of Governors at the Postal Service and let them know that it was important to them that the mail trucks that are going through their neighborhoods are electric. And mail trucks, they make over 30% of the federal government's vehicles. They would clean up a lot of air and climate pollution if they were electrified. I believe there was a stat that says electrifying USPS would save us from 2 billion to 4 billion gallons of fuel over 20 years. And we would opt out of burning 135 million gallons of fuel every year if we electrified our country's postal trucks. So we were doing that letter writing campaign for, ever since we heard that announcement. And finally, in December, we heard from the Postal Service that they are committed to electrifying their fleet. They'll only be buying electric fleets after 2026. So that's a huge win. I think we will keep monitoring that to make sure that they stick to that commitment. But I think that's just an example of, seeing an issue in your community and just reaching out to whether it's your legislator, your school district, and letting them know, I would like to have electric buses going through my community. I would like to have my hospitals have electric ambulances, for example. Where do you see an opportunity for that to improve air quality in your community? Even like garbage trucks, for example, is another perfect one. Garbage trucks are so noisy. It would be great if they were quiet and clean. So just that example of like being able to reach out to folks and let them know that this is important to you so that they know that they can prioritize that.
Thank you.
I'll jump in very quickly. Just recognizing when we talk about equitable decarbonization, that there's so much intersectionality, as we've all mentioned before. My call to action would be to identify your area of expertise and how it can potentially contribute to a solution. So we have an area that we focus on in terms of how we provide electricity to our customers. We also have an area where we reach out and we do customer education. That's what we're really focused on. And I think everyone can find something they can do and contribute. Again, whether it's data, whether it's education, whether it's outreach, but I think everyone can do a little bit if we're focused. And I guess the last thing I would say is, Athena kind of reminded me about having local priorities. Understanding your local context is probably all of our superpowers, and making sure that the focus really meets the needs of the community that you serve, wherever that might be.
Thank you so much, Jose. And I'm going to add an extra resource for everyone. I love your focus on, the fact that everyone has that area of expertise and way they can make an impact. We also heard from our keynote, Kizzy Charles Guzman, about finding your joy and, what inspires and motivates you. Not sure if anyone has heard this TED Talk. Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson has a great one called How to Find Joy in Climate Action, encouraging people to look at that Venn diagram of I believe it's your expertise, your joy, and what you can kind of keep doing the longest. And then that is a path forward. Anyeley, what's your call to action for the audience?
It's funny because I was thinking about before, and then I feel like I changed my mind listening to everybody else. What's interesting, well, to do this work, you need money. I think that's the easiest thing to say. And for example, the Portland Clean Energy Fund in the city of Portland was a community created, community-led, put on a ballot, voters voted for it, and now there's, I think it's like $100 million in 1 year to put toward this work. And that really stemmed from the community and then the voters. And so I think anything in your cities that you can do to kind of create new sources of funding for this, I think is huge. I think from the development point of view, I think what I'm trying to do in my company is create, and I've done it before, and I'm trying to do it again, is create these catalytic projects that other developers can look at and say like, oh, this developer has done this, I think I can do a part of that. And I think sometimes people get overwhelmed by very innovative projects because they think, well, I can't do all of that. It's like, but can you do one part? And so I think that's kind of my call to action to the development world is, if you weren't getting environmentally certified before, can you get the minimum certification this time? It gets easier and easier the more you do that. And yeah, so I think that those are my two recommendations.
Great, thank you. And love the call for catalytic projects. We have a coalition of triple bottom line real estate developers, Locus, and a big part of that coalition is both advocating for policy change and, celebrating and sharing projects. So we have a great question from the panel. This person's anonymous, but wish I knew who you were because we'd pull you right into the fold. They've observed, this intersectionality has been a big theme of the panel today, and you're all working in different sectors. So, that's obvious with this group that's pulled together. But what advice do you have for folks from other sectors that would make your work easier? And, what do you wish that others knew to support your work?
I'll jump in quickly. And maybe this is just an issue in Sacramento. But you have to really, I would love folks from other sectors to look at things from a holistic perspective and recognize it's not about the individual win, but it's about doing what's best for the entire region. What we've found is sometimes we compete against each other and do small little bits that don't have the level of impact that if we work collaboratively. So that would be so my recommendation would be look to partner with agencies. I wish I was in the same region as Athena and Anyeley, because I think we could do some great work together and we would have a much better impact on the community that we serve. So for example, we're doing our community impact strategy for SMUD. We've invested $13.5 million towards our environmental equity projects, but there's only certain areas that we're focusing on. We know for us, there's another $17 million of investment that we need from our region, and we're asking for that help, but we're putting our money where our mouth is. So that would be my ask, is that look at ways to partner to really draw from the opportunity to create a more collective impact.
Thank you.
I guess my call to action would be, not call to action, but would be about risk taking. I think that's one of the things that two things. One is more interaction between the public and private sector. I think a lot of times with government policies or programs, you kind of get in this bubble where you're like, we're going to do this, we're going to create this, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. I'm always the one being like, and then did you talk to the real estate developers to see how they would react to this? Because what you think in the government is going to happen is completely different than market forces, how the private sector is thinking. And so really going back and forth with who's, in my case, producing the buildings, let's say, or making buildings as a result of the land use choices, and will the outcomes of your policy actually result in what you think it's going to result in, and is there ways to kind of modify that? So I'd say definitely public and private sector. And then I think I'm speaking more to the government side, is taking more risk. I think a lot of times we've gotten, I say we because I can say on my government side, we've gotten in the status quo, don't make people upset, check the boxes. And climate change is not waiting for anyone. It's doing its thing. And so we have to be equally as aggressive and passionate and forward thinking, and that's going to cause issues, right? Especially when you think about kind of what I talked about, the segregated by design. The folks that have the biggest voice in most communities are those that are wealthy, maybe they have time, and they own land. And if you put those together, because of our history in the United States, those are not communities of color. Those are not the people being affected by climate change. And so thinking about how you do your public engagement, if you follow the same processes, you'll get the same outcome. And many of the processes that are put in place were intended to benefit certain people and not other people. And so that involves, in some cases, people taking more risks than they feel comfortable with, and I would encourage them to do so, with the end goal in our case being a more equitable outcomes and kind of reversing this climate emergency.
Athena, do you have advice for people from other sectors to support your transportation work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what a lot of folks said, but I think what Jose kind of said about being taking a holistic approach is spot on. I think something that I hear a lot, just listening to different school districts or city officials, is that if you're interested in electrifying your vehicles, the first thing you have to do is talk to your utilities. And so I think that just kind of goes with making sure that you're having conversations and doing a lot of planning, because that's really important when you're planning to expand infrastructure for electrification because of the charging infrastructure and other pieces that go into it.
Great, thank you. We have a lot of amazing questions, and at Smart Growth America, we'll try to use them in our follow-up materials and in future research and events. I wish we had more time today, but instead of going into every question, I think there've been so much connectivity across everyone's work, and that theme of intersectionality. Be great to hear, if you could, this is the end of the panel, but it's also the end of a 3-day conference where we've touched on community development, reconnecting communities and divisive infrastructure, and decarbonization and environmental justice today. So you've shared longer, the longer term, bigger picture calls to action, but would you like to share as we close out, what are your 3 words or, sort of top theme that you take away from our discussion and that you encourage the audience to think more about as we leave? It's fun to put people on the spot.
I figure I'll jump in that way I can crash and burn if need be. But I would say alignment, and I'd say innovation, and I would say action.
Thank you.
Sorry, because you start off with 3 words. I'm like, oh, I was creating 3 paragraphs. I gotta convert that to words. I would say partners, because of what Jose said with regard. He's right. If we were all together in the same city, we'd be strategizing right now. So you got to find your partners that are with you for this work. I think that's important across sectors. I think the intersectionality is definitely a word. I forgot to mention one of my interests. My background, I have a planning degree, I have an environmental technology degree, and a design degree, right? So a lot of times people say like, oh, how are you doing all this stuff? I'm like, they're all related. I don't see them as different things. I think they're all related. So that intersectionality I wanted to mention, I didn't mention before, is like, don't just stay in your lane. Maybe you have a lane and that's all you can do, but try not to just stay in that lane. And the third one is passion. How about that? Passion for the work.
Thank you. Athena, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, those were all really good answers that I'm jealous I didn't get to say first. But I think in addition to those, I will say, I think the first word that came to mind was mind shift, because it's like, you have to realize that there's an issue first. So I think that's very important. The second one I'll mention is creativity. So how can we solve this problem? What are ways that we can look around to do it that, we're not doing now? And then 3 is patience, because it's not a fast process. You just need to make sure that you're able to keep going on this journey, no matter how long it takes. It's really important, and I'm so happy, anyone that's able to continue doing this work.
Well, thank you so much. And that theme of patience and the other themes we heard about, partnership, alignment, has come up so much over these past 3 days. How can we support each other, knowing it's a long road, and everyone also needs to be able to have that moment where they can step back, knowing that the community is behind the change. So with that, I want to thank our 3 panelists. You've been totally amazing. And even if you don't live in the same city, I hope you do connect and find a way to scheme and change the world together. It's one of the wonderful things about these events, when people make new connections. So thank you so much for joining us. And I will have a few closing remarks before passing it over to our CEO, Calvin Gladney, who will be wrapping up the conference. It's been such a great 3 days. So thank you again to our panelists. And I just wanted to let everyone know we will have a survey coming through. It should be dropped into the chat shortly. So please take the time to give us feedback so we can, learn from you all what went well, what we can do better, and also learn what we can incorporate into future programming to continue building capacity around advancing racial equity through smart growth. And with our topic of climate today, I'd also like to make sure that the audience knows that we're about to start up a new initiative at Smart Growth America, where we'll be able to provide climate and land use technical assistance to a number of community-based organizations across the country. So we have a flyer that's going in the chat. We'd encourage you to take a look. Feel free to share it with your networks. And we're really looking forward to partnering with community groups nationally to advance equitable climate adaptation and equitable decarbonization.